Hello everybody and welcome to Organian's Puzzle Box. My name is Alex and today we're going to be looking at how to make an animation in Blender using a few tips and tricks. You know, it's not nothing very fancy, but I think it gets the job done, and I think a lot of people will appreciate that it definitely helps beginners to start animating and play with settings in Blender. And I hope you guys enjoy it. If you like it, please leave a comment, a like and a subscribe, and stay tuned for more content to come. Thank you for watching. So we're starting off in Blender now to get our model imported and also add its textures on. So I'm going to import the FBX format. That's how I've got my model saved as. I'm just gonna go into the folder where I've got the model saved, and that's it. This is basically the model, and you can see all of its parts over here. Now we want to start adding textures to it, so I'm just going to split my working canvas into two workspaces. Just going to open Shader Editor, and I'm going to press Door Low. I want to show you an example of how to add textures in case you've got a bit of a problem with it. This is the folder where I've got the textures saved. I'm just going to change the view to details, and then just so I can have a look at the actual map name, so it can be quite easy. So in this case we're trying to texture the door low. I'm just gonna make sure that I can see the textures over on this side when I start, when I add them. So for door low, I'm just going to start and find them. So I've got low door albedo transparency, so we can basically bring this in, and then we can connect this to our base color, and we should then already see that that's map being added over there, like so. I'm just gonna move these a little bit, like so, and then I want to start adding all the maps for the actual door. Now for some reason they're not exactly in the right order, but that shouldn't really be much of an issue. So we've got all the textures now in place, and we now need to start connecting them. And so we've got an ambient occlusion over here, we've got an emission, which I'm going to drop down over here, we've got the normal, and we've got the roughness as well. One thing that I do not have is the metallic. So let's just have a look for that one. Low door metallic smoothness. That's how I exported them out of Substance Painter. So yeah, now I've got everything that I needed for the low door. Now in some cases you may be thinking, well, we're just going to connect all these nodes over as they are named, but that's not going to work very well. We do need to do some things of combining the albedo and the ambient occlusion, the roughness and the metallic, so we can get the proper result basically. So we've got all of our maps dropped in here. Okay, so now what I want to do is let's disconnect the base color, as we had it over there, and I want to press Shift A on the keyboard and look for, search for basically not an add shader, but a math shader, and we'll change this to multiply. I'm also going to go to an RGB, mix RGB node as well, and I'm going to connect my albedo to color 1. I want to add a color ramp. This is basically how we're going to combine the ambient occlusion and the albedo together. So I've got my color ramp over here. I'm just going to leave it the way it is, but I'm going to connect the ambient occlusion over to here on the color ramp. And then the color node from the color ramp, I'm going to connect the color 2 over here, and I'm going to also use the multiply node that I've got to basically add, to take the color of the color ramp, put it into this value, and then I want that value to basically be something that we can change. So I'm just gonna add a value node as well, so I can play around with it if I need to. Once all of this is done, I'm going to put this into specular. So I'm going to connect that to specular, and then I'm going to connect this one over here, the RGB mix, and in this area, and I'm just going to put this to maximum, and I'm going to switch to multiply. And now we've got our ambient occlusion and our base color set up. We then want to go to roughness and metal smoothness, and for this purpose I'm just going to copy paste the multiply twice, and I'm going to drop it in here. And now I want my roughness to basically connect to, I think, no, I don't need another multiply, I actually need an invert map here. I'll show you in a second why. So now I've got the roughness and the metal smoothness. I'm just going to swap them about. I'm going to put my roughness into this color, and then I'm going to put my my metalness in that color, and the roughness I'm going to put into color 2 of the multiply node. And then I'm going to take this one and put it over here. And now I want to connect this into the roughness channel over like that. So now you should see the effect, and this is what we get. And the reason why we've got some of these, changes over here, some of these nodes, is because we can play with the settings. So for example, in this case, I want to have a multiply, and then I want to start decreasing this, and I can play with the amount of, the balance between the roughness and the metalness. You can invert over here. This is why I invert, because if not, they would have looked like this. So again, you just toy around with it and you get the result that you want. But this is what's going to work for us. Now I want to move on to the normal map. So we've got a normal map already here, a node. I'm just going to disconnect it, and then I'm going to add a bump map. And I'm going to put this over here, and this is going to be connected to our normal. And the normal map itself is going to go into the color of the normal map, and the normal map is going to connect to the normal of the bump map. And now we've got a bump value, and for some reason it looks a bit strange. Right, and that is because we need to change this to non-color. The normal map to change to non-color, and the rest of it should be the same. It should be left the way it is. Now we just need to check that the normal map is showing correctly, so that it doesn't need inverting, and it seems that it does. Yes, whatever needs to be going outside it is, and whatever needs to go inside it is as well. So this is now our material setup. We just need to add its emission. So with emission, it's a bit of more of a tricky one. I'm going to add an emission node over here. Sorry about that. Let me just type in emission, and then I'm going to connect my emission map to this, and I'm also going to add shader node, and I want to connect the emission as a shader over here. Then I want to connect the whole material as a shader over here. And then this will connect to the main surface node over there, right? And now we have successfully combined the emission map and all the normal and the color and the ambient occlusion, everything else for the door. So now what we want to do is basically we want to start doing this for everything. So every other map in here, for every other object. And then once that's done, we can actually start separating objects and start to add some keyframes, and to basically start putting animations into our object. So now what we can do, we've now come to a point where we basically have the final textures to put on, and we want to work in a very modular way. So one thing to do is to always use as many shortcuts as possible, and especially shortcuts that you can set up for yourself. So in this instance here, I've got the door lock done, the entire texture set, all the textures that are added to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy all these materials and everything that I've done on this, and basically go into my final bit that I need to texture, which is this head, and I'm going to paste everything in here. And now I want my nodes to be connected just like they were in the other, basically in the other model. And what you'll notice straight away is that we don't have the correct textures placed on our, in our material. But that's not a problem, because we can swap those around immediately once we connect all the nodes. So I'm just going to delete all these textures from here, and I'm going to bring the proper textures of what I basically need. So in this case, I need my albedo, I need my ambient occlusion, I need the emission, metal smoothness, roughness, and normal. So now I'm just going to start dragging these in. This is a very straightforward process, and as I do this, you'll see the textures updating properly. So that's this way. Okay, so that's now connected, and I just need to add my emission. And that's it. Basically, we have now done it. So you know, for the rest of all the other models have done the same thing. I basically copy and pasted all these nodes, so I can immediately add all the textures to it. So now we've got a finished model. It's all textured. Everything is okay. We can now start basically splitting it and adding animations to every part of it. Okay, so guys, now let's just get our workspace the way we want it, set it up for an animation. So the first thing we'll do is we will move on to our 3D viewport on this side as well, and then we'll go into render mode like that, so we can see our model. We're going to keep this one the way it is because we're going to use this one to edit our model and basically create all the animations in it, and we're going to be able to see the the results over here of what we're doing. Right, so now what we want to do is we want to start separating objects and create our scene, but the light in the render mode is looking quite dull. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press Shift A and I'm going to add a light, which is a sun, and then this is the sun, our new sun created, which is a light that goes into the whole space of the model. I'm going to deactivate shadows for now. And I'm going to start playing with the strength of it. I'm going to start playing with with the angle of it as well. But we can't really see our effects properly because the environment is being very distractful. So I'm just going to deactivate wireframe and any other elements from it. And I'm also going to go to the background settings, and I'm going to make sure this is set to black. So now we can have a better view of what's going on. And now we're going to go back to our sun properties, and you click this button over here to change things like shadow, strength, and so on. And depending on what we want, we can play with the angle depending on what sort of mood light you want to have. And you can go into the material editor of the door and start playing with some of the settings in order to get a better get a different sort of result of how the light hits this model. And you can activate shadows, for example, which will then add a bit more ambience to it. It really all it all depends on what you want, your preferences. So now I'm just going to start separating these objects. So in order for us to separate the objects, let's just go into this canvas into this 3D viewport, and I'm going to select the first model, which is the I'm actually going to just make sure I'm going to select the box, and I'm going to press the cogs. I want to separate these two because if I want to rotate them now, for example, this is what's going to happen. They're going to rotate, this is the center point, so they're going to rotate around that. But we want them separated, and we want them to rotate individually for our model to look quite nice. So we're going to create this effect of how the doors open and basically these cogs spinning to make that happen. Okay, so now we've got the cog selected. We're just going to press Tab on the keyboard to go in edit mode. Click anywhere in the world to deselect everything, and as you hover over one of the cogs, just press the letter L, which then means it has selected all the vertices of this cog only, and hasn't selected anything on that one. The reason why we're not doing a dragging like this to select everything is because it's going to a lot of times not select everything from the model, but by doing what I've done, we make sure that the entire cog is selected. So now with that selected, we'll press the letter P on the keyboard and we'll click selection over here, and now you can see in the top right that we've got a cog and a cog low, so that means we've got basically two models. So if we go out of edit mode and back into object mode, you can see that we've got two cogs and they're individual, but both of them have the same, the same point that they're going to rotate around. So if we try to rotate again, this is what's going to happen, which is not the effect that we want. So we're going to have to move the pivot point to their center in order to get a proper result. Now, one of the things with Blender is that not a lot of things are very well. They don't make a lot of sense if you're coming from something like 3ds Max. So you have to get tuned to it. So this is why I'm struggling sometimes to find some of these settings. But in general, Blender's got quite a very powerful tool set. So whatever you could do in 3ds Max, you could do in Blender as well. So right now, we want to set the center point of this cog. We want to set it right here in its center, and right now I'm trying to get into front view like that, which I am right now, and by holding Shift, I'll right click in the center of the cog like so, and now the center point is there. But as you can see, the rotation gizmo hasn't moved, and that's because we haven't done any settings over here. So what I want to do is want to change this to the 3D cursor, and now you can see the rotation is done there, right? Which is exactly what we wanted. So we've now successfully set the gizmo to that point, which is fine. We now want to add some keyframes with this rotating. So in order for us to do this, I'm just gonna increase the size of my keyframe down here for this, and I'm just going to get the number of frames. The number of frames. We'll put them to, let's say, 500. I don't know why it says invalid. Oh, sorry. It's because I think I'm doing this wrong. I need to set up the number of frames that we can have to 500, and for some reason it's not allowing me to do it over here. Right, now it's done. Okay, so we've got 500 frames. This is where it starts, this is where it ends, so that's fine. And we'll go into, so this is the object selected. Let's go into, let's make sure we're in object mode, and we go over here to the transform options. So whatever we do, it's going to start to move this, move this object. So at frame 1, nothing is basically happening. So what we want to do is we want to keyframe that, and we can press these buttons over here on the side if we want to keyframe them. You can see they turn into yellow when you do that. But if we press K on top of them. I, not K, sorry about that. If you press the letter I while hovering over them, you can see that it saves the whole set to its current location, and you can see it's now added over here. It has added a keyframe for this. So if we move on to, let's say, frame 30, and based on our settings over here, you can see that we're rendering at 30 frames per second, meaning that's a second basically that's passed. We can now go back into here and say, well, in that time frame, I wanted this to, as you can see, if I do it here like that, this is what's going to happen. It's not going to work out well. I want this to rotate. If you do it this way, this is fine. I want this to rotate like so, right? And now we press Y again on the I on the keyboard, and you see it's still basically broken. So we want to go back because something is still not working properly, and we need to find out what. Generally, these problems happen due to not setting up the pivot point, setting up for the object the proper pivot point for it. I mean, the gizmo is there, right now. It is basically rotating this object where the gizmo is, but when you use the transform options for the object itself, it still takes the same origin point from the center as it did before. So what we want to do is we want to go to object, to set origin, and then say origin to 3D cursor. And now, basically, you can see that these have turned yellow as well, which I'm not really sure why, but it doesn't really matter. We'll just press Y in here. If we move, you can see it's because we had a bit of movement. I'm just going to Control Z until all of it is back to normal. We're just going to go into, the frame 30. Let's just make sure we've got the origin set to our 3D cursor. Well, actually, you can see that's already changed. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to save that there, and I'm going to delete this other keyframe from here. If we go back, nothing has really changed right? So we'll go over to frame 0, press Y to make sure we lock down this position. We'll go back to frame 30, and at this point we can now start rotating our object. And as you can see, it rotates in place with how it should. How it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be doing that anyway. So now I'm just going to say, okay, rotate 520 degrees. Now this is a lot of rotations in just a span of a second. So if we press space on the keyboard, you can see how this is now spinning and then stopping, right? You can see this happening. Now, if we take this frame and we move it over to, I don't know, 140, and now we press space, this is moving a lot slower because it has to do 520 degrees, spin in a lot longer time than just 30 seconds, yeah? So we want to go to, let's say, I don't know, 160 seconds or whatever you want to do, okay? And we want this to spin from the left to the right. We want it to spin, so we'll go to 160, and we want to say, a lot more, basically a higher value, 2,323. Now we're pressing space, and you can see how quickly this is spinning. Now, because of how the way the keyframe works is it's building up momentum and then slowing it down. So right here around the center is where it reached a peak spin. So we go to 0. We then go to 1. Well, actually, what we're going to do is we'll take this keyframe from here. We'll press Control C and then Control V over here on keyframe 3. So if we press space, you can see that nothing is really happening because it's supposedly reached that velocity already. So we've definitely got a problem because the more you see it's spinning over here, and then it's reached that velocity, so nothing is going to happen going forward, right? So what we want to do is we want it to reach peak speed quite quickly. So over there, and then by this point over here, we definitely need, probably a lot larger number in order for it to maintain this peak speed. And you can see it's going very, very fast at this point, and then it's sort of like stops very dramatically. We can add a slowdown speed around here, so we can say this is only, I don't know, 10,000. You can play with these as much as you want to add as many variations as you want, but basically it spins very, very quickly, and then at some point here it sort of like reaches 6,000 and then goes to 10,000 and back to 15,000, which is a bit weird because it's a bit counterintuitive how it's starting and how it's building up, and then it sort of like stops over here, which I'm a bit unsure why that's happening. But yeah, very strange. So we can just delete all of these and pretty much go back to square one because I'm not really happy with it. So again, let's go to 160 over like that. Make sure we've got this one set up over here to frame 0. So we basically want by 160, we want it to still have this speed. That's the thing with this rotation. The moment it has reached its number of spins, it basically stops. So you have to know when you want this to stop. When do you want these spins to slow down? So generally what they do is you build more momentum as you go along, and add more keyframes basically as this happens. But I think having it slowing down there should be just fine. So now what we want to do is we want to basically do the same for the other cog over here. Now we know the settings, right? It's 2-3-2-3. That's what it needs to rotate to. But it needs to be negative 2-3-2-3, so that it spins inward just like this one does over here. So we're just going to select the cog, go back to frame 0. Press I on the, well, actually don't do that first. First, what we need to do is we need to make sure that our space, our pivot point is in the center over here. So holding shift and right clicking will set that gizmo over there. Let's just make sure that our object origin is set to 3D cursor, and now we basically have a good starting point. So just press I on the keyboard, or hovering over these to lock the position there. Just going to go to 160, and now this is the rotation that we want to play with. So I'm just going to click that value over there, and I'm going to plus minus 2323. I think that's what it was. Let's just click the cog, yeah, 2323. Okay, and basically as the frames unfold, well, actually we can see them over here. You can see them rotating inward, both of them at the same time, and they actually have quite a nice effect. Okay, but they're not popping out in any sort of way. So, you know, they're just rotating, and obviously when all the other pieces of this will rotate as well, will do their own thing, then we're going to have a lot more, you know, a way better transition into everything. But until we reach that point, we want to play with the emission map a little bit. So I'm just going to change to my shader editor. I've got the cog selected. Now whatever I do to cog 1 will happen to cog 2, and the reason for this is because they both share a texture set. So, you know, you can easily see this by just removing the color, and you can see all of these elements are being affected by it, by the removal of the color. So it's not just the two cogs that are going to be affected, there's also these elements in here. And that is the importance of planning your materials the way you want them to be activated. You can't just texture something and then expect a good result if you haven't planned ahead based on what you want to do. So in our case, we've got an emission strength here that we can play with, and I want my emission to start off with no value. It's basically just the color in there, but it's very, very nullified by the strength of the emission being set to 0. What I want to do with it though is by the time it reaches, I don't know, let's say 80 or 90, yeah, 85 should be fine. I want at this point, I want till point 80 to still be 0, and I want at 85 to blow out in terms of its strength, so we can, well, actually that value is it's too big, so let's just try a 30 or something like that, which is fine. You know, this is how it's going to light up, and then at frame 90. We also want to go to the render settings for this as well, because I don't have a lot of effects. So let's just get an ambient occlusion. Let's just get a bloom effect in there, so it looks a lot better, and a screen space reflection as well. And at this point is where I want my emission to really go even higher, just like that. And then it stays to about, it slows down a little bit. It's 44 there, and then by the time it reaches 160, it sort of goes to that level, something like that. So let's just play it out. Let's see what happens. So it starts with nothing, pretty much rotates, boom, and then it has an explosion, and then the light fades out. Now there's too much of this nothing going on over here. So we may want to sort of play with these settings a little bit, so we get this sort of effect. Now again, it's all about how much you want to blow this out of proportion, because right here at the end at 160, maybe we want these cogs to spin backwards or whatever. So we say, to 170, I want this to go to 1000, like that, so very powerful. So you can see it's now rotating inward, getting some light up, and then right here, boom, it explodes with light, and maybe this is the point where something else happens in the scene. So the way I've got this set up, I want to go to my door latch, and you can press these to see which ones they are. And the door latches are now, basically they're all connected to each other. So we're going to go into our 3D viewport. And with the door latches connected, we want to basically go into edit mode and select that one, you know, by hovering over it, pressing L. Now that's selected. Press P to separate, which is fine. Then go hover on the other one. Just press L until you manage to select it. Now that's selected. Okay, that's separated. You can see them over there, how they're being pretty much singled out. And that's it. We now have separated all of these. Now, because we're not rotating them, we don't really need to change any of the gizmos. So I'm just going to press Tab on the keyboard, select one of the door latches, and if we go into Move and we go upward, you see how that moves. But we don't need to change the pivot point at any point because we're not going to rotate it. We just want it to go slide up or down, so that's not really an issue. Okay, and these are on a different texture set, as you can see. Well, actually, they're not on different texture set. They're just not as powerful in terms of the texture itself. So 170. Now, at this point, I want them to start retracting. Well, going basically going upwards. We've got these two. So these two here could have been together, really, if you think about it. So I'm just going to control. I'm just going to have them, you know, pretty much selected, so I can move them both at the same time. I'm going to go on to the beginning, and again I'm going to go to my transform. I'm going to make sure that's locked down. So as this scene unfolds, maybe at this point they've already, you know, we can play with the location of it, and we can start saying, well, I want these to go above, basically, yeah, like that. So 83247, or maybe, you know, something like that. I'm just going to copy this value over to this one. Again, let's just make sure that's over there. So at this point we want this value to be copied over here as well. So what happens then in the scene, as these rotate, those go above. They're moving a bit fast though, so I'm not really sure about that because they're obviously moving a lot quicker than we want them to. We could potentially take this keyframe and move it, you know, maybe somewhere around 160. As you can see, these are rotating, but that's moving a lot slower. So we want that to happen at 160. So again, we'll copy the move, and we'll move it to 160. So as you can see, they're going a lot slower now, a lot slower pace. This is happening, yeah. We also want to select the other two door latches. I shouldn't have separated them, to be honest, but it's fine. So again, you know, frame 0, nothing is happening. 160, they basically go down like so, yeah. 302 minus 30253, that's fine. I'm just going to go to this door latch, make sure that this is in position, and at 160 this is where it's going to be, yeah. So now all of those elements are now moving as this transpires, basically. Okay, and as this is happening, over around frame 30, we want this element, sorry, where is it now? Door lock low, no, that's fine. Main latch, so we want the main latch to detach as well. So we want to go into edit mode, make sure we separate them. Separate selection, like that. And at frame 30, you know, at frame 30, 29, this is the position, nothing has changed, but at frame 30, again, well, actually, you know, it didn't really matter. Basically, at frame 29, frame 30, I want this to start moving, and I want it by frame 70. No, let's do the same thing. Frames 160, I want it to go Why does it not, doesn't want to go back for some reason? Come on, Control Z. Interesting. Oh, it's because I'm in edit mode. Sorry about that. Right. So let me just go back to 160, and we are in object mode, and I want this object not to go sideways or anything like that. I'm just going to move this to 160 over here. Let's go to 160. So I don't want it to move that way. God, why is it not? Oh God, I'm constantly in edit mode. I don't know why. Right, I'm in object mode now. Sorry about this. I'm just going to go to 160, and basically I want this not to go that way. I want it to go on this axis, and I want it to go around here, right? 7.51. Okay, so that's fine. We're just going to go to main latch low 1 as well, and then frame 160. I want it to go to -30. Oh, sorry, that's not right. I want it to go this way as well, and we're going to save it. So what happens then? We basically have moved this already to that position, as you can see, because we haven't added a starting point. And I did this on purpose just for you to see what's going to happen. So 160, we cannot have anything because we need at frame 30 to say to our program that this is the position where it's supposed to be. So at frame 160, that's where it's going to be. Now, if you don't use the same values, so for main 751 and this one is not -751, then they will be leaving at different intervals, which is not something that we want. You want the intervals to match. So you can see them basically going outwards, and that's it. So now we've got all these elements out of the way. There's other things that we may want for it to happen. So at 170, we may want something else to happen, or right about here when these latches are leaving, maybe at frame 50, we want the head to do something as well. It's again, if you've seen my intro, you can see how this is rotating and how it has all these effects basically in place. Okay, so we just want to now add some add some spinning motion to the head to get these rings to move around and just create a bit of a more of a dynamic approach to this, because we want our door to open. So I'm just going to start doing that now. We want in frame, at frame 50, we want something to happen with the head, with these rings. But the first thing we want to do is we need to set up the the pivot point at the center for the head as well. Now it should be already. This should be fine. God, I hate putting this into front view. Right. So I think the center point of this is already done. So we could just go into a median point. Now you see this is where the median is, so that's not going to work for us. We want to go into the center of this object basically. That's where we want our point of, I'm just going to put it the 3D cursor, and I'm basically going to go into, oh God, right, okay, so that should be fine now. Let's just put it over here and see what happens. Object set origin. Geometry to origin, origin to 3D cursor. Okay. And now let's just see what happens if we rotate. Now this is rotating okay. Shouldn't be any real issues with it. We've got a head. We've got a mask. So you can see these elements. If I take them off, you can see what the three elements are that I can manipulate. I can shift click to put the 3D cursor to be, the origin to be a lot better. So I've got my head selected. I'm in object mode. I'm currently manipulating the 3D cursor. Let's just go to object again, set origin to 3D cursor. Right, if I go in rotate, I should be able to now do this. Okay, come on. I'm just going to go to view, and I'm going to make sure that the view is the front view like that. You see? and I'm just going to make sure that the center is over here. Object, I've got my object selected, set origin to 3D cursor. Okay, so now at frame 50 we know that our position is going to be this, basically, for our head, right? Nothing basically changes. This is going to be our position, but we wanted to rotate to, let's say, you know, whatever degrees we wanted to rotate. Let's say 180 degrees, so we can just put in there 180. Sorry, not at this frame. We obviously need to move on to with the frames, and you can look on the other side of the screen to see when you want this to rotate. So we could say by frame 90 we want this to rotate by 180 degrees, which is fine, and then we can save that in there. And then you can go to head mask detail, object, set origin to 3D cursor, and then head mask low. We can probably do the same thing, you know, set origin to 3D cursor. Okay, so now we've done the origins on both of these. We need to go back into, you know, the frame 50 where they're all okay, and save our starting point. But now when we go to frame 90, we want all of these to have rotated by 180 degrees as well. So that's now done, and this is now done as well. Okay, so you can see that they're rotating at the same time. We could have simply connected them all together and they would have rotated anyway, but you know, we may want to individually sort of do something about these. Now at frame 90, I want my shader editor to do something as well with the emission. So at frame 50, nothing was really happening in terms of strength or anything like that. Frame 85, same thing, but at frame 90, we want to have, let's say, a bit of an explosion. So I don't know, maybe something like that. Maybe it's going to be too strong. I don't really know. By frame 100, we need this to go back to its, you know, to its starting point. So if you go back here, you can see what the starting point was, which is 1, and let's just say it's going to be 10 rather than 1. Let's just get closer, a bit closer, so we can have a look. So that sort of comes to light, but then the effect isn't as great. You know, you can see how it turns into red, but the effect isn't amazing or anything, just because nothing is really happening. I'm just want by, you know, let's just take it to 1 rather than having it 10. So this is how it's happening. Now if we get this ring, this plate as well to shine, then we're definitely gonna have a way better time. So right here at 90, let's go to the to this piece, which is the door lock low, and I want it to basically, you know, from frame 80 stay to 1, and at frame 90 to go to maybe 2000, and then by frame 110 to go to, let's say, now let's just say about 50, and remain at 50. So when we press this now, you can see that it does this shine, which is a lot better, but the head itself is still probably moving way too quick. You see, it loses its power way too quickly. So it goes to 1 way too quickly. So I'm just going to move that to 120. So now it's sort of like lingers a bit longer. But we've got these parts now turning, which is great. We now want these rings to turn as well. So right at this point here, see at frame 70, this is where this latch leaves this area. So that means that this outer ring can actually move. So that's the outer ring. So I'm just going to go to 3D viewport now, and you can see that I can basically rotate the outer ring, but it's not rotating very well. See, it's like it's not even in the center for some reason. So I'm just going to go to object, set origin to 3D cursor, Well, actually, that's the problem. If I don't use the 3D cursor, so if I just use the median point for the rotation of this object, that's going to be correct. Basically, nothing is going to move in there very weirdly or awkwardly or whatever. So what we want to do is we want to say at frame 70 nothing was happening with this ring, but by the point it reaches, I don't know, 170, over here, I want it to rotate once, twice, and it remains like that at 450 degrees. So let's just see what happens. So this starts spinning once, twice, and then it goes like that. You see? And when this happens, so exactly at frame 170, I want the head to basically, so until 169 nothing has happened, but at 170 I want the head to go back to 0. Did I do that right? I want the head to go back to 0. Yeah, that should be fine. Okay. And then I want the head mask low, same thing, at 169 it's still there, but at 170 it goes to 0. Okay, head mask, so that's fine. 170 it goes to 0. Now this is going to be quite a big change, so I'm curious to see about this motion, because you can see it instantly teleports, which is not exactly what we want. So we want this to be moved to probably frame 190. Same thing in this. Again, it may be too quick anyway, because imagine there's not a lot of frames here. So it goes back, which is fine, and throughout this whole thing you can see that ring moving, but you can't really see the other ones. So maybe this is the point that the other rings are moving as well. So we can select at 100, at frame 170, we select the inner ring, and we say to the inner ring, I want you to be, you're in this position, but by frame 210, maybe you've done, I don't know, you've done 769 degrees of turning, and then this inner ring here, frame 170, you haven't really done anything, but frame, let's say 240, you've rotated a lot slower than the other ring. Yeah, so let's just have a look. So this is the moment when these rings rotate as well, and that one continues on a little bit more, but we still have a lot of frames to fill in here, all the way to 500, as you can see. So that's the point now where you may want to add some more elements to move. Like, for example, you want the cogs to move again, and this is all very, very based on your taste and what you're trying to aim for. But this is the point where you can become very, very creative with your stuff. Now is the point where you can get the doors to open, you can get the all these latches to open. So I hope this has really helped you guys to sort of understand how some of these transformations can be done and how you can rotate objects and create animations with them. I'm just going to basically skip to a point more towards the end, so I can show you sort of my end result on this. And you can apply this to your own model as well. You can do some of this. You can play with some of this as well. If you want to see, in other tutorials, you can see how I paint stuff and how I can add emission maps and how I can play with them to, create all of these effects basically. So let's just skip on to the end so I can show you how my door opens. So after playing around with some of the keyframes, with some of the colors and some of the lighting, basically this is the effect that I've got, and you can see it over here. I've got all these turning. I've got some lights going around. I'm sure you can see the light, how it moves around the scene as the scene unfolds. I've added a lot more tension to how the rotation is being handled and how different elements from this sort of moves. And I've got a camera movement as well right there at the end, so I'm sure you can see it. I've got a camera added. I've got these spotlights that you can see that are moving around the scene as this as everything happens, and all of these are moving a lot slower to just create that momentum, create a bit more drama to an atmosphere. And you can see right here at this point the camera will start moving inwards basically, because this is an intro and I want my video to be, the video I want to be at the back of this door basically as it opens. And now the tricky bit is, how do you export this out so all of this black is basically ignored by the by your render? So when you go into your render settings over here, you've got a few options. But what I would do, to be very safe with this, what I would do is I would change my output to maybe something like a PNG or Targa or TIFF or whatever. I'm just going to go with a PNG, for example. Make sure you got RGB and alpha activated over here. Compression, I would remove all compression so it has the highest quality, highest fidelity basically. You definitely want that. I'm playing with a high resolution for a 16 by 9, so this is my resolution for my video, so it can turn up into 4K. I've got a 24 FPS. You can go to 30. The more FPS you render this at, the less seconds you're gonna have from your timeline. There's some other options in here that you can play with in the render, in the Eevee render, such as the bloom, the ambient occlusion, the number of samples that you want to do. If you want it less noisy or more noisy, you can play with that as well. But in the end, basically, it's all up to your preferences and what you want to achieve in Blender and how you get an animation out. So this is going to be my intro for now, basically. This is what I've been working on. This is going to be my intro going forward for my future videos. And probably in the future, I'll work on a different one, a better one. But right now, I'm actually quite happy with what it turned out to be like. And I hope you guys learned something today. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe, comment to my channel, and let me know what else you want to see in the future. And thank you guys for watching, and I hope you have a good day and stay safe, wash your hands, all the other stuff that you need to do in these very trying and very strange times.